Sometimes life doesn't fall apart all at once. It fades quietly. There was a time when I was breathing, but not really living, smiling, but not really happy, moving forward, but with no direction. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. You can look strong on the outside and still be fighting a silent war inside. I didn't believe someone out there could change that. I didn't believe that one person, someone I hadn't even met yet, could become the reason I chose to stay, to fight, to hope again. But this isn't just a love story. This is about survival. This is about the kind of connection that doesn't just touch your heart, it rebuilds it. The kind of love that doesn't just comfort you, it transforms you. The kind of presence that reminds you why you deserve to live, to grow, to become better. To my future wife, you didn't just walk into my life, you saved it. And today I want to talk about how love, even the promise of it, can pull someone out of their darkest place and turn pain into purpose. There was a time when I didn't think I would make it this far, not because I was weak, not because I didn't try, but because some battles don't leave bruises on your skin. They carve their weight into your spirit. And when you carry enough silent weight for long enough, you start to believe that heaviness is your natural state. I used to wake up every morning with a strange emptiness in my chest. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet and constant. Like something was missing, but I couldn't name it. I had goals, I had responsibilities, I had people around me, but none of it touched the part of me that felt lost. I learned how to function. That's what most of us do. We function, we show up, we nod when we're supposed to nod, we laugh when everyone else laughs, we keep moving, but inside there's a room we don't let anyone enter, a room filled with doubts, disappointments, memories that still sting, and questions that echo at night. I became very good at hiding that room. Strength can be a mask. Silence can be a mask. Silence can be armor. And I wore both well. People saw composure. They saw resilience. They saw a man who could handle his world. What they didn't see were the nights I sat alone, wondering if this was all life was going to be, surviving instead of living. There's a difference between being alive and feeling alive. I didn't understand that at first. I thought surviving was enough. If you're breathing, you're winning, right? If you're standing, you're strong, right? But there's a deeper kind of strength that has nothing to do with endurance. It has everything to do with connection. Before you, I had forgotten what connection felt like. I had convinced myself that love was temporary, that people leave, that promises fade, that opening your heart is just another way to give pain an invitation. So I built walls, not the kind you see in movies, not dramatic or obvious, subtle walls, logical walls. I'm fine on my own. I don't need anyone. I've got this. And for a while, that story protected me. But protection can turn into isolation. Independence can quietly become loneliness. And one day, you wake up realizing you've protected yourself from pain so well that you've also protected yourself from joy. Then something shifted. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't some cinematic moment. It was subtle. A conversation, a presence, a feeling that someone was listening, not to respond, not to judge, but to understand. You didn't try to fix me. You didn't try to impress me. You just stayed. And that was new. You stayed when I was quiet. You stayed when I was guarded. You stayed when I was guarded. You stayed when I didn't have perfect words or polished confidence. You saw the parts of me I kept hidden, and instead of stepping back, you leaned closer. There's something powerful about being seen without performance. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't have to be the strongest man in the room. I didn't have to carry every burden alone. I could just exist, flawed, tired, human, and that changed everything. You didn't save me in the way movies describe saving. You didn't pull me out of a burning building. You didn't dramatically intervene at some breaking point. What you did was quieter but deeper. You reminded me that I mattered. You reminded me that my heart wasn't a liability. You reminded me that vulnerability wasn't weakness. I had grown used to thinking that my struggles were mine to solve alone, that asking for support was failure, that opening up meant losing control. But when you listened to me talk about my fears without looking at me differently, something inside me softened. I started to breathe differently around you. Have you ever noticed how your body reacts when you feel safe? Your shoulders drop, your voice slows, your mind stops racing. Around you, I didn't feel like I was in a constant state of defense. I wasn't preparing for impact. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I was just there, and in that space, something began to heal. It's strange how love doesn't always arrive as excitement. Sometimes it arrives as peace, and peace was something I didn't know I was starving for. You became the quiet in my chaos, the steady rhythm when my thoughts were scattered. You didn't erase my past. You didn't magically solve my problems, but you gave me a reason to face them differently. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? I started asking, how can I grow from this? Because suddenly, growth wasn't just about survival. It was about becoming better for us. Before you, my future felt abstract. It was something I planned for in practical terms: career, responsibilities, goals. But with you, the future became personal. It had warmth, it had laughter, it had shared mornings and late night conversations and small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary simply because they were shared. You made tomorrow feel worth showing up for. There's a certain darkness that comes from believing no one would truly notice if you disappeared emotionally, not physically, emotionally. The slow fading of your light. I had been dimming myself for years, not intentionally, just gradually, protecting myself from disappointment by lowering my expectations, but you looked at me like I was already enough, not potential, not a project, not someone who needed to be reshaped, just enough as I was. That kind of acceptance is terrifying at first, because when someone sees you clearly and stays, you run out of excuses to hide. You can't blame the world for not understanding you when someone is right there trying to understanding you when someone is right there trying to understand you. You can't keep pretending you're unworthy when someone treats you like you're valuable. So I had to confront myself. I had to look at the parts of me I had neglected, the wounds I had ignored, the bitterness I had justified. Loving you meant becoming honest with myself. It meant asking hard questions. Why do I push people away? Why do I assume the worst? Why do I believe I have to earn affection through achievement? You didn't demand those changes. Your presence inspired them. That's the difference between control and influence. You never tried to control who I was, but your belief in me influenced who I wanted to become. And slowly, the man who was just surviving started to disappear. I began taking better care of myself, not for appearance, not for approval, but because I started to see my life as something valuable again. I started speaking more openly, laughing more freely, dreaming more boldly. It wasn't overnight. Healing rarely is. There were days I slipped back into old habits, days when fear whispered that this was too good to last, days when my past tried to convince me that happiness is temporary. But every time doubt crept in, you responded with consistency. Consistency is underrated. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic, but it builds trust in a way grand gestures never can. You were there on the good days. You were there on the difficult days. Your energy didn't shift when I wasn't at my best, and that stability gave me strength. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Now I understand strength can also mean allowing someone to stand beside you. It takes courage to let someone matter that much, to admit that their presence changes your world. You changed mine. You didn't just add happiness to my life, you restored hope. There's a difference. Happiness is a feeling, hope is a foundation. You became the reason I believed that life could be more than endurance. Before you, I was walking through life like a man carrying invisible weight, After you, I started setting some of that weight down, not because I wife T vanished, but because I realized I didn't have to carry it alone. There's a quiet kind of salvation that happens when someone chooses you every day, not because they have to, not because it's easy, but because they want to. And when you experience that, something shifts in your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who has to fight for love. You start seeing yourself as someone worthy of it. You taught me that love is not about possession, it's about partnership. It's not about dependency, it's about support. It's not about losing yourself. It's about becoming more fully yourself in the presence of someone who encourages your growth. I used to be afraid of the word forever. It felt heavy, unrealistic, fragile. Now, when I think about forever, I don't see a trap. I see possibility. I see shared resilience. I see two imperfect people choosing each other through change. You didn't save me by solving my problems. You saved me by reminding me that my life is worth fighting for, that my heart is worth protecting for, that my heart is worth protecting but not imprisoning, that my story isn't defined by my worst chapters. There were moments before you when I questioned my value, when I wondered if my best days were behind me, when I felt like I had already given too much of myself to things that didn't last. You entered my life not as a distraction from pain, but as proof that pain doesn't get the final word. And that realization breathed life back into me. I started setting higher standards, not just for others, but for myself. I stopped tolerating situations that drained me. I stopped shrinking to fit into spaces that couldn't appreciate my depth, because loving you required me to respect myself. It required me to show up fully. There's something sacred about building a future with someone who knows your broken pieces and still believes in your strength. You saw the cracks in me, but you also saw the light coming through them. You never defined me by my lowest moments. And because you didn't, I stopped defining myself that way too. When I say you saved my life, I don't mean I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I mean, I was drifting, I was existing without direction. You gave me something solid to move toward, a reason to grow, a reason to plan, a reason to plan, a reason to imagine years instead of just days. You turned survival into intention. I used to think love was about, now I know it's about depth. It's about choosing patience over pride, communication over silence, understanding over assumption. It's about showing up even when it's inconvenient. And every time you showed up, you chipped away at the walls I thought would never come down. You helped me see that my past doesn't disqualify me from a beautiful future, that my mistakes don't cancel my worth, that my fears don't define my destiny. Because of you, I don't just want to live longer. I want to live better. I want to be kinder, more present, more intentional. I want to build something that lasts not because it's perfect, but because it's nurtured. You didn't just walk into my life. You brought light into rooms I had closed off. You reminded me that strength and softness can coexist, that masculinity doesn't mean emotional isolation, that courage sometimes looks like saying, I need you, and I do need you, not in a way that weakens me, in a way that strengthens us. You gave me back the parts of myself I thought were gone, the dreamer, the believer, the man who isn't afraid to love deeply. And every day I wake up with a gratitude I didn't know I was capable of feeling, because somewhere along the way, without fanfare, without drama, without a single grand announcement, you helped a tired soul remember how to feel alive again. And every time I think about the man I used to be, guarded, distant, convinced that loneliness was safer, I realize how close I was to settling for a life that looked fine on the outside but felt empty within. How easy it would have been to continue drifting through years without ever allowing myself to experience the depth of connection that now shapes my mornings and steadies my nights. How different my path would have been if you had not stepped into it with your patience, your quiet strength, your unwavering presence that kept whispering through your actions that love does not have to hurt to be real, that stability is not boring, that commitment is not a cage, and that two people choosing each other daily can create a kind of refuge in a world that often feels unpredictable and harsh. And even now, as I stand in this awareness of what we are building, I understand that being saved was not about being rescued from destruction, but about being guided back to myself, back to hope, back to the version of me who believes in tomorrow not as an obligation, but as an opportunity to continue growing beside you, learning you, supporting you, protecting what we have with intention and humility. But Dest, knowing that love is not maintained by intensity alone, but by the steady willingness to listen, to adapt, to forgive, to remain present when life tests our resolve. And as I continue speaking from this place of gratitude and honesty, I feel the weight of everything that could have been lost if I had never allowed my heart to open again, if I had chosen fear over faith, if I had mistaken isolation for independence forever, because loving you has shown me that real strength is not about enduring alone, but about building together, about trusting enough to intertwine futures, about daring to imagine decades instead of days, about recognizing that the greatest transformation does not always arrive with noise, but often unfolds in quiet moments where two people decide that what they have is worth protecting, worth nurturing, worth fighting for. And in that realization, I continue to discover layers of myself I had buried under disappointment and doubt, layers that now breathe freely because you believed in me before I fully believed in myself, and that belief became the spark that reignited ambition, compassion, discipline, tenderness, all the qualities that had been dimmed by years of silent battles. And as I move forward carrying this renewed sense of purpose, I remain aware that the journey of growth never truly ends, never truly ends, that loving you will continue to challenge me to evolve, to communicate better, to be more patient, more understanding, more accountable. And I welcome that challenge because it means I am no longer sleepwalking through life, but actively participating in it, choosing it, embracing it with open hands instead of guarded fists, understanding now that being saved was never about dependency, but about awakening, about realizing that my life has deeper meaning when shared, when aligned with someone whose presence turns ordinary days into something steady and significant. And as these thoughts continue to unfold within me, I recognize that the story of how you saved my life is still being written in every small decision we make, every conversation we have, every quiet moment where gratitude replaces fear and hope continues to expand into the space where loneliness once lived. And I keep discovering that this transformation is not a single event, but an ongoing process that unfolds with each breath I take beside you, each step I move forward, knowing that I am no longer walking without direction, but moving with intention toward a future we are shaping together. And in that movement, there is still so much more to learn, so much more to build, so much more to understand about love, about resilience, about the quiet power of two hearts choosing alignment over ego, connection over pride, presence over distraction. And as I reflect on how far I have come from the man who once believed survival was enough, I continue to feel the depth of this awakening spreading through every corner of my life, reshaping my priorities, refining my character, reminding me that being truly alive means remaining open even when vulnerability feels risky. And it is within that openness that I keep finding new reasons to be grateful for you, for us, for the simple yet profound reality that sometimes the greatest rescue comes not from being pulled out of darkness abruptly, but from having someone light a candle and sit beside you until your own flame remembers how to burn on its own and continues to burn brighter with every shared moment that still unfolds ahead of us without needing to be concluded here.